As June 6th arrived, however, there were a few D-Day vessels that were nowhere near the Isle of Wight. 30 feet underwater off the coast of Normandy, 10 men are existing on a diet of baked beans and tea. They are the crews of 2 mini-submarines known as X-Craft. The men in submarines X-20 and X-23 had been waiting for 2 days. Their job was to erect a telescopic mast fitted with green lights and a radio beacon that would guide the first invasion vessels heading to Juno and Sword beaches.
They were there to provide the precise navigation that a landing craft emerging out of the darkness towards a beach couldn't expect to have on its own. They were there as navigational markers.
The X-Craft had each been towed across the channel by an armed trawler. Now, utterly on their own, they were powered by a diesel engine from a London bus when on the surface and by battery when submerged. A hatch gave the crew access to the deck, and a wet and dry hatch allowed a diver in and out. 4-ton explosive charges could be fitted and released from the control room. The explosives weren't needed on D-Day, but had been useful in carrying out the X-Craft's original purpose, to find and sink German warships.
The need for smaller submarines came about with the large German battleships like the Tirpitz hiding in the Norwegian fjords, so essentially really far away from open sea, and the British ships couldn't get to them, and they protected the harbours with huge anti-torpedo and anti-submarine nets. The X-Craft also had the capability of cutting through those nets, so by developing a smaller submarine, that allowed us access to the ships that could potentially cripple our navy.
The X-Craft had managed to drop explosive charges under the Tirpitz and damage her, but many submarine crews had been lost in the process. The men waiting silently off the Normandy coast in early June 1944 were well aware of the dangers. Earlier that year, they had trained in total secrecy in Scotland until the time came to move south. Jim Booth was a crew member of X-23.
We stopped at a pub, I think, to have lunch or something, and the chap said, "What have we got on that lorry, sailor?" And it looks like a mini X-Craft, doesn't it? And I said, "Well, it does a bit, doesn't it?"
As early as the afternoon of June 4th, Jim and his fellow crew members had been in position a quarter of a mile from the Normandy shore. They were so close they could watch German soldiers playing with beach balls. Inside the X-Craft, they were dressed as French taxi drivers and workmen. If they drowned and their bodies were found, no one would think they were British submariners. That night, expecting Operation Neptune to be taking place at dawn, the 2 X-Craft surfaced to pick up a vital coded radio message. It would be part of the BBC's 10 o'clock news bulletin.
There were 2 signals, and one of them was that the operation's not on tomorrow, and the other one was that it was, simple as that. No plain language. It came something like Mrs. Something as a cat and had 3 kittens in Little Hampton, or something like that, you see.
But Eisenhower had decided the weather was too bad for a channel crossing. D-Day was delayed for 24 hours.
Everything, oh God, down we go again.
When D-Day was postponed for a day, these poor men had to live in this tiny tin can in disgusting conditions for a whole 24 hours more.
To be inside an X-Craft, the only way I can think to describe it is almost like living in a broom cupboard. It was an extremely cramped space. They had 1 small bunk and that was it, so they had to take turns in sleeping.
Well, of course, you couldn't stand up anywhere, except in the periscope well. Most of the time I was sitting down, I suppose I sat down by the wheel. And then everything was, it was wet and damp and that sort of thing, so it was pretty horrible. And we were young, you don't complain then, do you, when you're young?
On the night of June 5th, the crew surfaced once more. They received the signal they wanted. D-Day was on. By 4:30 the following morning, the subs were in position, the masts were raised, and radio beacons activated.
Then there was this rather pregnant pause. We wondered what was happening when there we were sitting there, you know, like bloody fools off the beach, you know, rather